introverted man here. Brian Holdsworth is wrong again. The last time he was wrong, and I corrected him, and it only took me an hour. This time, it won't. It will take me less time than that, maybe. So he says, without God, this is what you get. And the little thumbnail for this video is like a chandelier hanging from a giant chain in the middle of outer space. It has an arrow pointing to it saying, atheists are okay with this, which is complete and total straw man. But, that's all he had last time was nothing but straw man. So this time he also has straw man.
If you've ever taken an interest in, especially, theistic or Christian apologetics, or been introduced to classical or medieval philosophy, then you've probably heard some arguments for the existence of God. And it's also true that some of those arguments will resonate with certain people more than others. Personally, I've always found that the moral argument and then certain versions of the ontological argument are the most convincing for me. But I recently had what I might call like a breakthrough in my own appreciation for St. Thomas Aquinas' cosmological arguments that might just now make them my new favorites. And the reason is because I was introduced to an analogy that helped me kind of close the gaps in my own understanding of how they work and what it is that makes them so convincing. And I realized after I had this epiphany that it would be greedy of me to keep it to myself. So I thought I would share it here on my channel, starting with the analogy. So imagine you're in just a wide open space that stretches on seemingly to infinity in every direction. But like the environment that you experience here on Earth, everything that appears in this space is pulled downward by something like a gravitational force, even though there's no ground.
So, gravity is created by mass. So you would have to have some significantly large mass pulling the object towards it, not down, but towards it. Down is relative to where you are on the surface of the earth. But you would have to have a giant object of some sort. Secondly, if you had an object of significant size, it would also have mass, and so it would also have gravity. And that will be important later in his broken analogy.
I get that doesn't make sense, but just indulge me. It's hypothetical. And for the sake of those drawn towards pedantic questions, those of us who are in this space, we're supported by a platform that prevents us from falling down. We are in a static position. And then we notice in this space that there is a chandelier hanging by a chain, and the chain just goes up way beyond our ability to see where it ends. Now, we know everything in this environment, if left unsuspended, will fall, right?
No, because the mechanics of such a long chain and a chandelier would snap if you had gravity acting on it. A long chain, again, depending on how big the object is. So if it's a regular sized chandelier, it's hard to tell because the picture he had doesn't let you know how big this chandelier is. But let's just say it was normal size and that chain seemed to go on indefinitely upwards. Well, there's a limit to how long it could go up before it would snap under the weight of itself. So this is actually an interesting field of study that they're doing in trying to create what's called like a space elevator, an elevator that would go from here to outer space. Save a lot of money if we could do it, but the problem is the higher you go, the more and more you need weight support, and then if you were to reach the atmosphere, the winds and forces acting on that building would be significantly high. So one way around this would be to hang a rope down from an orbiting space station, but you have different problems then. The tensile strength of it would have to be so great that we just don't have any materials that can do that yet. And certainly a metal chain would not do it. You'd have to have something like carbon nanotubes, which just don't exist yet. So this scenario, although it's meant to be an analogy, fails to take in consideration of reality. And an analogy should be something to make a complicated idea simple. But because your analogy fails in reality and it's easily picked apart, um, it's not making it simple. It's making it more complicated because it's not analogous to anything. If there was an infinite chain that a chandelier was hanging by, we would know that it has to be hanging by something. Well, no, not necessarily, because the chain could be suspended in outer space since nothing is acting on that chain. Now, yes, something is acting on the chandelier and something is acting on some of the chain, but not the rest of the chain. And if the chain is able to support itself and not snap asunder because of the pressure that it's under, then the mass of the chain that's in outer space outweighs, if you will, the chain that isn't. So now you have forces at work that would counteract the gravity at hand, unless you're talking about something like a black hole, um, which then would have different cosmic forces in action. So basically, the scenario that you're describing isn't a real scenario, even a little bit. And so, as an analogy, completely falls under its own weight. But, I'm just pedantic like that.
And the chain just goes up way beyond our ability to see where it ends. Now we know everything in this environment, if left unsuspended, will fall, right? We can take objects like out of our pockets, for example, and hold them out like this and just let them go, and we notice that they drop into the void. But this chandelier that we observe isn't falling. So if we're inquisitive and rational, we would probably ask ourselves, why doesn't the chandelier fall? What's holding?
Okay, and again, given that we're working within the scenario he's provided is we're standing on some platform. I don't know how that works. Apparently he didn't say we have air or water or food, so I guess we're dead at that point. But okay, we're standing somewhere safe, and there's gravity affecting this chandelier and its chain, but it isn't affecting the rest of the chain that we can't see the end of. But that doesn't mean it goes on indefinitely. We just can't see the end of it. And us asking any questions about it would not be something that we could answer without some sort of tests upon the object itself. We can't just assume that we know what the conclusion is, given that this is something far outside of everything else that we've ever experienced in reality. So, something that is this strange, you're introducing the idea that we need to use our common reasoning in a scenario that is unreasonable. And so the analogy breaks down into nothing. And so an argument from analogy can be valid in a sense, or can be not necessarily valid, but be not not fallacious if the analogy is functional. But if that's all your argument is an appeal to and from analogy, then it potentially has no logic to it. Even worse when the analogy itself is set up so poorly constructed that it fails under any amount of criticism. Um, and in this case, you're saying how would we want to know the answer to this question, and so we use our basic intuitions that work in this reality that we exist in, and now we're trying to apply that to this reality that you've created that doesn't exist and couldn't exist, and use our same intuitions there on an object that is nothing like what a real object would be like. And so the analogy then fails because they're not analogous anymore.
Holding it up. And if you really wanted an explanation that accounted for the actual depths of that question, that got right to the heart of it, would you be satisfied if someone answered you by saying, well, it's attached to a chain link right above it? You can see it there. That's what's holding it up.
Whether or not you're satisfied with any given explanation that somebody offers doesn't negate or prove the explanation. What makes an explanation legitimate is not just that it explains it, but that it is, in fact, the explanation. Somebody can just say something that sounds good or sounds pleasing to you. Somewhere up there is a giant ceiling that it's attached to. Cool. What's the giant ceiling attached to, though? What's holding that up? Giant walls that we can't see. Okay, cool. That's an explanation, but now it also isn't, because I would have to prove there is a ceiling and there are walls. I don't know would be the only reasonable answer to give. Not, well, there's another chain and another chain and another, well, that we can tell, but what's holding it up? Well, that's an assumption. There's an assumption that there is something holding it up. Maybe there isn't anything holding it up. And if it goes on indefinitely, well, maybe it doesn't need anything to hold it up, because outer space is big, and so the mass that that's creating negates the small mass that's pulling it towards itself in the first place. But again, we're mixing in reality with this fake scenario, and the two don't work together. So the analogy fails.
I hope you would say no. I would certainly find that unsatisfying, because that raises the inevitable follow-up question, which is, well, what's holding that link up?
But what if nothing is holding it up? So this is a loaded question, and it's an assumption made based on our own understanding of how things work here. If you have a chain holding something up, and I have this light up here. Now it doesn't have a chain; it just has a metal pole that's holding it up, and it's attached to the roof, the ceiling. And what's that attached to? Well, it's attached to the walls. So what's the walls attached to that's holding them up? The floor, and then what's holding up the planet? Well, nothing's holding the planet up, because the planet is floating in outer space, and it's in orbit around the sun, because the sun's a bigger mass than it is. And so it draws it into an orbit around itself. And there isn't anything needed to hold up the planet Earth. So sometimes the answer isn't what your intuition would get to, and your bad logic here isn't getting us to the answer in this scenario that you've created that you think is a good analogy, which it isn't.
An equally unsatisfying answer would be, well, the link above it. None of those explanations really accounts for how the chandelier manages to resist falling into the void.
Okay, but then the answer is, I don't know. And whether that's a satisfactory answer or not doesn't matter. That's the honest answer. Sometimes we don't know. Just be satisfied with that. Okay, there's a mystery, and maybe we can solve it, maybe we can't, but some things are a mystery. But this analogy isn't a real mystery, so there's nothing to wonder about or ask about.
Because based on appearance, the links in the chain go on for as far as we can see. But just because we can't physically see the end of the chain, that doesn't mean there is no end. That would be jumping to a conclusion that we don't really have the grounds to make. But even if the chain did go on indefinitely, it still wouldn't explain what's holding it all up. And
yeah, but if it went on indefinitely, then there isn't anything holding it up, because by definition, it's going on indefinitely, so there is no end to it to which something would be holding it up. You can't even keep your own analogy straight.
Infinite regress of explanations that don't actually account for what's going on here isn't a more satisfying explanation. Just because you add more bad explanations to the question doesn't get us to an actual sound explanation.
Well, yeah, but also making up an answer isn't a way to answer the problem. Just saying, well, there has to be something holding the chain up doesn't make that answer correct. It might seem satisfying to you, but that doesn't make something true. What satisfies you or dissatisfies you doesn't prove or disprove anything. Oh, that answer really satisfies me. That answer dissatisfies me. Therefore, it's false. But it satisfies me. That means it's true. No, that's not how reality functions. That's not how to get to the truth. And in this case, with this weird scenario, we're confronted with some object that we've never seen and forces that we've never seen in a scenario that we've never been in. The only answer would be, I don't know. I don't know that there is anything holding it up. Maybe there is, maybe there's not. I don't know how long that chain goes either. Maybe it's indefinite, maybe it's not. So we can't draw any conclusions about it at all. But what's going on? We don't know what's going on. But something has to be holding it up. Well, not necessarily, but maybe there is. But we don't know what that is. And that's it. That's the answer. But if you're going to say, well, adding on stuff isn't good, that, yeah, sure. Because you shouldn't just add to something an answer that is itself not an answer. You need to know that that answer is real and true and be able to demonstrably demonstrate that that answer is an answer in the first place. There's a giant holding that chain. The giant is standing on a planet and it's holding its arm off the edge of the planet. There you go. There's an answer. Was that satisfying?
And the reason we know this is because if we remove a link from the middle of the chain and then we reattach the one above it and below it so that the chain stays intact, and then we take that one link and we hold it out and we drop it, what would happen? It would fall, right? And if we unlinked the chandelier in the same fashion from the chain, it would also fall, which tells us that both the chain and the chandelier depend on something else to hold them up. It's not in their nature to stay suspended. It's in their nature to fall.
There's no nature here. There's mass, and mass makes gravity. The chains, if far enough away from the force that is great enough to pull upon the chandelier, would actually clump together and orbit each other. And depending on their size, they might even create a small planet, or if they're big enough, a sun. So, and then if they're too big, they could even create a black hole. But this whole thing just falls apart because, again, it's just a made up scenario. You said void, that these things are pulled into some void. The bleeper you're talking about, I don't know. The best scenario would be a black hole, but again, then it would be pulled in very slowly, get to the edge, and then we would never see it fully be pulled in, and the rest of the chain would either snap from the forces involved or pull everything else with it, but it would all be time delayed, and I mean, just ridiculous. Goodness gracious.
So claiming that the chain is a qualified explanation for why the chandelier stays up is obviously logically false.
You're not using logic, you're using intuition. And that's why you're creating so many inaccurate statements. You said the chain has some nature. No, there is no nature to fall towards things. That's how things behave. Uh, There's the mass of the chain and the mass of the thing pulling the chain. This is greater than this, but they're pulling towards each other. It's just that the smaller mass is pulling weaker than the bigger mass. So if you have two masses that are the same size, they will pull towards each other until they collide. That's how things work in reality. But that would be understanding gravity, which you clearly don't understand because you're using the made up gravity in your scenario that only works in one direction of down, which makes no sense. But then again, your entire thing makes no sense and thus is completely and utterly broken in every way, shape, or form. Your intuition is not logic. Logic is logic. So you need some premises to form an argumentation, which you haven't done. So you're definitely not using formal or informal logic. Just saying the word logic doesn't make it logical.
Something must be holding the chain up, and it must be in the nature of that thing to not fall. If we could somehow
Nature of the thing, again with this nature idea, that's completely inappropriate to use on a object like a metal chain or plastic chain or glass chain or whatever it's made out of, who knows, nanocarbon fibers, I don't know, but there is no nature in that sense. Things work according to certain principles for sure, but is that nature? It just has no meaning. The nature of the thing to hold up the chain doesn't need anything to hold it up. Well, that's not true. Again, that light is held up by the ceiling, that is held up by walls, that are held up by the ground, that's held up by a planet that isn't held up by anything. See, the reasoning there ends at some point. There doesn't need to be anything that's holding up the planet, but the ancients thought the planet was held up. The ancients thought that the sun had to be pulled by a chariot that we couldn't see because they didn't know how else it could move around. And see, what you're doing is you're using your intuition in an inappropriate way to draw an inappropriate conclusion about reality. But you're not even actually talking about reality. You're talking about an analogy that you stumbled upon, no citation given, of course not, that you think helps us to understand some broken argument for God, which you didn't mention which broken argument that was. You just mentioned Thomas Aquinas, I guess, but you didn't say which one of his broken arguments you're referring to. Not that it matters.
travel to the end of the chain and observe like a platform that the link, the last link is then anchored to, it would have to be in the nature of that platform not to fall. That's the key logical point in all of this. If a thing is doing something that isn't in its nature to do it, like suspend in midair, then something else must explain how it is able to do that.
Now, how do you know it's not in the nature of it to just be that way? Again, with this idea of nature that's just completely made up. It's not a thing.
But if, as you follow the sequence of causes, you only find objects that also aren't able to suspend themselves in midair, then you haven't gotten to an explanation, because logically, you have to know that as long as things are doing something that they can't do on their own, there must be a cause in the sequence that can do that thing of its own nature. And if
Incoherent word salad. Nature, nature, nature. Why is he saying that? Because it's part of his conclusion. That's why. But it's not, like I said, it's not even an argument that he's making. So.
if you don't agree or you refuse to draw that very necessary logical conclusion, then you have to be content with an incoherent conclusion.
Your conclusion is incoherent. In fact, you have nothing to base this conclusion on. use it, how do you know the chain's nature? You're saying we now somehow know what this nature is. IN Davenport. Hi. Hello. He says DM. Yay. Woohoo. Hi. I don't know who that is. New person to me. Welcome. Okay. Anyways, so somehow now in this scenario that he's presented, now we somehow have knowledge about the chain, its nature, which is completely made up and arbitrary. We know how this functions somehow. It's just, oh, goodness gracious.
Which is that the chandelier is being held up by things that can't hold themselves up, let alone anything else like the chandelier. And to draw incoherent conclusions is to embrace irrationality.
Yeah, and that's all you're doing. You're embracing irrationality. How do you know that at the other end of the chain, there isn't another void that's pulling on that chain down, well, I guess upwards, because in your scenario, the thing's being pulled downwards when there is no down when you have gravity, but whatever. We're in a weird universe where there's down and the chandelier's being pulled towards this void, and there's this chain. And well, maybe at the end of the chain, there's another void that's pulling it up. And then it's not being suspended by anything. It's just another force is working upon it. Whoops. I mean, you know what? I got to draw that out because, some people are more visual than others. So I think that this deserves some MS Paint here to really drive home the point that I want to make here. So just bear with me a moment. This won't take too long. Let's see. What do I want for? Let's do that. Yeah, let's do that. That's some good stuff there. Yeah. All right. Oh, you should watch me draw because that's more fun than just listening to me draw. Let's get the window here. Okay. All right. Now you can see me. Oh yeah, this is some good stuff. All right. So here's our chandelier. Well, let's make that black. Chandelier, and then here's our void that it's being pulled towards, right? And then you're saying, well, what about the chain, which would also be C? So we need we screwed that up. All right, well, we need this to be something lamp, L for lamp. Oh, why did it put it over it? Background fill, here we go. Oh, that screwed that up. Oh man. Oh no. Stop it. Okay, so that's lamp, and then this is C for chain, right? And then, why did it do that? No, dude. Oh man, why is it doing this? No, do it the way I want you to. Darn it. Oh god. This is some quality entertainment here. All right. But he's like, oh, there's got to be something that's making this, suspended. And I'm like, yeah, sure. It's another, and he's saying that there's forces pulling it this way, right? Okay, so all you do is what? No, that's not what I click. This is what I want to click. There is this, right? It's another thing. It's just pulling the damn chain the other way. And there you go. There's your answer to your completely made up scenario. And what answers this satisfactorily is there's another void pulling the damn chain up the other way. There you go. That's the answer. Solved it for you, buddy. Oh, it's so easy to break an analogy that's just pathetic like this is. But we get it. You're trying to say that infinite regress doesn't make sense, and you have to have something that's holding up the chain, and that thing has to have a nature, and the nature of the thing that's doing it has to be a thing that can do it, because otherwise that doesn't make sense. And that thing is God. God's holding up the chain of the light and that thing. And what happened? Where did this thing go? Okay, we're not done yet. He's almost, well,
You've discarded reason at that point.
yeah,
So
you
let's
have,
bring
yes, you have discarded reason.
this analogy into our own reality. So we observe that you and I and everything around us exist, right? That's pretty obvious. But if we want to understand how we exist, we might ask, well, what causes us to exist?
What? What causes us to exist? Our parents?
And someone might say, well, your parents caused you to exist. Or if they wanted to be a little more comprehensive, they could say, well, your environment or your access to food and nutrition, a solar system and a sun that keeps you warm, etc. Okay, so all of those things are things that you could point to that contribute to my existence and the other things that I observe. But do any of them exist on their own? Or are they also dependent on something else for their existence? Because if they are themselves contingent, then just like the links in that chain, we haven't arrived at an explanation. In fact, by multiplying contingent things to the question, just like links in that chain, instead of getting us closer to the answer, we've only introduced more questions, which are, how do all of those other things exist? The question can only be answered by something in that sequence of causes whose nature it is to exist.
Nope. Because you don't know that there is a thing with a nature to just exist. That's not logical. That's just putting up a thing that you think answers the question. What we have is a chain of events, and perhaps, maybe it seems like that. But if we're honest, and I want to be honest, this guy doesn't, but I like honesty. Now, I don't know which cosmological model is correct. The most popular ish one is still the Big Bang, but how popular that is actually debated among cosmologists. So I don't know which one's the most popular, and they debate which parts of that model that they agree with. So I don't know. We'd need a wide scale survey of cosmologists to figure that out. There was one done a while back. There was some sort of study done on what cosmologists think about different questions. So I'd have to find that for you, or you could, find it for yourself. But regardless, if we're sticking with Big Bang cosmology, you get to a point where the universe is, well, it's small, but forget about how big it is. It's hot. It's like really super hot. And it's so hot, they have a special name called the Planck temperature. I've mentioned this many times, but, and at that temperature, physics, as we understand it, don't do no more. We don't know how that works. It's too damn hot. It's so hot that even atoms can't form. So it's kind of hard to have physics when there is no physical thing that you can have. And atoms are physical things. So what's going on? We don't know. So the chain of cause and effect, we don't know if that applies in that realm. Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. We don't know. And that's the honest answer. And we can't just use our intuition or deductive reasoning to insist that, well, it has to be this way because that's how everything else works. Well, we don't know it's everything else. We know that it's stuff that we observe. But that might not be true consistently across the universe. Black holes act really weird. Supernovas are really weird. They're absolute zero. Whether or not that's possible is really weird. And the Planck temperature, being the hottest thing, is really weird. So we don't know is the answer. And to assert that there's a nature of a thing that must exist is simply not even a conclusion that is warranted because you haven't actually looked at reality. You've only looked at your intuitive ideas and chained together what you think is a pattern that you can follow to a conclusion. But what's interesting is the correct conclusion wouldn't be a unproven thing. It would be something that is like everything else. So, but also that's hard to say too, because if you're asking this question of, well, where did X come from, right? You go, okay, where did the planet Earth come from? Well, it came from dust. Where was that dust from? The sun. Where did the sun come from? And more suns that exploded and enriched guts spread across the universe. Where did those come from? It all came from the Big Bang. Okay, it all came from the initial expansion of the universe. Well, where did that come from? Wrong question. Why? Because we don't know it came from anywhere. In fact, the science about that cosmology is everything was already there in that tiny dot. That was everything. So there was nowhere for it to come from. It always was, because there is no time and there's no space either, because it's so small. Space isn't even really a thing. And it's like, well, how does that work? I don't know. But if that's the case, then that's the case. So there was nothing, because you had everything always. And it expanded. Well, why did it expand? Don't know. It just did. Maybe it had to. Maybe it couldn't help it. When did that happen? Well, there is no when yet, but once it started, then there was a when and a where. And then everything happened that could happen, because that's how it works. And so you can't say, well, I came from a biological thing, and so that goes all the way back. Well, to some point, because at some point, the biological thing that I came from is nothing like what I would recognize as a living entity. It's a bunch of cells. It's not even that. You go back far enough, and it's a bunch of proteins linked together. And then you go, well, that's all elements. And you go back and back and back until, well, you just don't know anymore. So, this intuitiveness doesn't work. But at the very least, what you would have to say is everything that came from something has always had a natural thing, that I have a natural explanation. That is to say, I came from things that are solid, and the things that made that were solid, and so on and so forth, all the way back. And that even when you get to atoms, those are, well, maybe not solid in one sense, but there's something there, there's energy there. And so there you go. But it's still natural. And it's also that at some point, intelligence wasn't required to produce something that would be intelligent. And that actually took a long time to get to intelligent. It's a gradient that's hard to, it's not like it happened now. It's more like it happened over time. So it's kind of weird. But again, it came from something that wasn't intelligent. So the idea that you can say, well, it's always coming from something intelligent is wrong. And then, but the idea that it's always coming from something natural, well, yeah, that seems to be right every time. But could that be wrong? Sure, it could be wrong, but we see no reason to say that it is wrong. But of course, what he's talking about is, we know he's talking about a non-natural thing that he labels God, that just exists because it does. Well, okay, that's the universe. It just exists because it does. Why add a God on top of that? Well, because he wants to believe in God. He does believe in God. Maybe he needs to believe in God. And so the conclusion that it must be God will always be his conclusion, regardless of the facts or the actual science or the actual logic, which he doesn't have at all. Not even a little.
It has to be something that doesn't depend on anything else for its own existence. And even if we can't observe or understand this thing, we know it has to exist because we find that contingent things do exist and don't explain their own existence. For that to be logically possible, there must be something that explains its own existence. It is its own nature to exist.
How about reality itself? It just is. Doesn't need any other explanation, or the singularity. That is the explanation. It just is. And Carl Sagan famously said, why add a step? If you're content with saying that nothing made God, why not save a step? Say nothing made the universe. Because he's a theist. Also, hi, Paul. I didn't say hi to Paul. So I said hi to the Iron guy, but not to Paul. So I had to say hi to him. I didn't have to, but I did. So, yeah, anyways.
Just like with the chandelier, it logically can't be suspended in space unless something is holding it up.
No, because like I said, maybe there isn't anything holding it up, or maybe the thing holding it up is nothing like what you suggest.
We haven't found anything that can hold itself up in the observable sequence of causes.
So then why assert that there is something that holds? It just doesn't make any. God, man. Why make up an idea that itself has no proof of it? Just because it seems to fit doesn't make it the answer. Oh, man. Are we done yet? No, 6 minutes in. 14 minutes. Dang nabbit. Is he just going to keep saying the same thing?
Likewise with us, we exist, but our existence is dependent upon something
Yeah, he's
else.
saying the same thing.
And ultimately, that something else must be a necessary thing.
No, not really. But okay, same old, same old. Okay, we get the point. We don't need to keep going. He's just saying. I'm just gonna wind up saying the same rebuttals that I've been saying. This isn't logic because, well, first of all, there's no syllogism, so it can't be formal or informal logic. It's not logic because nothing he's saying is based on reason or logic. He's saying things that are non-scientific in nature. The analogy he gave is completely broken and incoherent, and when disassembled into its component parts, reveals that he doesn't understand gravity or reality, and then there's multiple answers to the scenario he gave that aren't the answer he wants. And so using intuition might work in some scenarios, but not all. And when it comes to the universe, I don't think that it's going to be enough to get to the answer. And the answer seems to be, at least with Big Bang cosmology, the singularity always was, and it was forever there. And everything that ever will be or is also there. All the energy, all the everything is there in that non-moment, and then time and space start at the same time. And space. And there's no why to that, perhaps, or maybe there is. I don't know. But then things unfold in a natural sequence of events, leading to more natural sequences of events that eventually lead to a very natural sequence of events. And if you want to say that's the nature of it all, okay, cool. But you don't need a God to have nature. You just need nature. But if you did have a God, God would also have an explanation of some sort. And the explanation could be, well, it's like the universe, it just is. Okay, cool. But how does it work? See, we don't know how the universe works in that singularity, but you don't have any idea how God works at all. What is God made out of? They'll say nothing. How is something made out of nothing? Well, God's made out of a soul or a spirit. What's that made out of? Well, it's made out of nothing because it's not physical. It's non-physical. Well, what does that mean? Where is it located? It's not located anywhere or when, because God is outside time space. So God is nowhere and no when? How does that make sense? That's not satisfactory. Not that satisfactory should be a way to decide if something is true or false, because satisfactory is of course, game that you can play where you build stuff to get parts that build more things. Oh, sorry, wrong satisfactory. At any rate, your analogy fails, and Aquinas' argument that you alluded to fails, and you fail. You don't have a valid and sound argument. You don't even have an argument. You're not using logic. You're using deductive reasoning, and you're doing it really badly. And your conclusions aren't warranted. And you didn't have any repeatable test either, or any empirical evidence. So what do you have? No argument, no evidence, no tests, no nothing. So we should be skeptical of your conclusions. Until next time, make sure to be Paul or Ian. And if you're not Paul or Ian, then be the Diverted Man. And if you can't be any of the three of us, then be yourself. And the only way to be yourself that makes any sense is to post a comment on this video. And if you don't do that, then you're not you. And if that doesn't make sense, also post a comment. And if you don't post a comment, then you didn't do that. And that's bad somehow. And if none of that made sense, don't worry about it, because I'm done for now. Until next time, be skeptical. And after next time, well, stay skeptical. I mean, come on. What do you think I'm going to tell you? To suddenly stop being skeptical? That'd be crazy. All right, now we're done. All right, yeah, we're done. I'm done. Why did I say we? I don't know. We.